I'm Ashley Michaels, and this is Colorado Point of View. The longest government shutdown in U.S. history is now over. Wednesday, President Trump signed the temporary budget bill into law. Means SNAP benefits will resume. Federal workers will get paid. The deal came after a busy few days at the Capitol. Members of the House came back to work in Washington for the first time since mid-September to vote on a government funding package that passed the Senate earlier in the week. Here's what lawmakers agreed on. The government will be funded at the same level as before through the end of January. Federal employees who were laid off during the shutdown will get their jobs back. And the deal includes a promise that the Senate will vote next month on a plan from Democrats to extend those expiring health care subsidies. Now, both of Colorado's senators, John Hickenlooper and Michael Bennet, still voted no.
I voted no because the budget did nothing to address one of my biggest concerns, which was the expiration of the Affordable Care Act tax credits at the end of this year.
Joining us from Washington, D.C. to talk more about it, we have Republican Congressman from Colorado, Gabe Evans. We know you were just here a couple of weeks ago, so welcome back.
Good to be on with you again.
All right, so a lot has happened over the last week, last couple of weeks since we've talked to you. But how are you feeling about everything that's happened over the last few days in D.C.?
Well, I'm so happy that we could get the government turned back on again because we know how critical this is to the lives of everyday Americans. Longest government shutdown in history. So this is air traffic controllers not getting paid. We saw the impacts that had on travel, military, law enforcement, farmers, not being able to go out and work with the USDA to be able to get the inputs that they need to grow next year's supply of food. And then specifically here in Colorado, 600,000 low-income individuals, including 300,000 low-income kids, rely on SNAP benefits for their next meal. And so I was so happy to be able to turn the government back on. I voted to keep the government funded back in September. We should never have gotten to this point, and I was incredibly disappointed to see all 6 Democrat members from Colorado vote against putting food in the mouths of 300,000 low-income Colorado kids. But, I'm just happy that the government is back on now.
Okay, so one of the big question marks going forward is still health care. Now, you and I have talked about this at length when you've been on our show before, but your fellow Republican congressman from Colorado, Jeff Hurd, he's pushing for a 1-year extension of the affordable health care tax credits that Democrats have also been fighting for. Now, we caught up with him in D.C. this week. I want to take a second to pause to listen to his idea.
We need to address the underlying cost of health care. It's an issue in my district. It's an issue across districts in all of Colorado and, in fact, the entire country. Extending the enhanced premium tax credits is a temporary short-term substitute way to address the cost of health care. But more importantly, in the long run, we need to look at those underlying drivers of health care, which are pushing costs up.
All right, I want to hear from you. Would you be on board with a 1-year extension like he's been proposing?
Yeah, so we've talked about this, you and I, before. There's 2 sets of tax credits out here, and so we have to make sure we're being clear which ones we're talking about. The ones that are being discussed right now are the enhanced premium tax credits that came about during COVID. The Democrats passed these when they controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House, again, a couple of years ago in COVID. And what they did was they lifted the income cap. So now it doesn't matter how much money somebody makes, they can get a subsidy to help pay for their health care. They're expiring this year because the Democrats set them to expire this year. Republicans had nothing to do with the fact that these are expiring. And so then the question, as my colleague Jeff Hurd said, is what do we do in the short term to make sure that there's not a cliff for healthcare costs? And then what do we do in the long term to make sure that we're addressing the underlying causes? Earlier this year, Republicans actually brought forth a proposal called the cost sharing reduction. And that proposal was scored as reducing the premiums for folks that buy their health care on the marketplace. That would have brought an average of a 12% reduction for folks that are purchasing through Obamacare, through the exchanges. And it would have also saved the taxpayers over $100 billion in deficit spending. So premiums go down, and when deficit spending goes down, that also drives inflation down, which fixes cost of living issues across multiple sectors of the economy. That was a bill that I voted for earlier this year. Unfortunately, that also died in the Senate, where you need 60 votes, and Republicans only have 53 votes.
Now, this is not the only idea coming from Republicans in Washington. I want to bring up an idea that the president floated over the weekend to give money from subsidies directly to people instead of to health insurance companies that would then lower premiums themselves. Is the president's idea something that you would support?
Yeah, I think this is absolutely something that we can talk about and look at. How do we cut out the middlemen? Because we know that the more middlemen you have in an ecosystem, the more expensive that ecosystem gives. And so right now, these Affordable Care Act enhanced credits, again, COVID era credits for somebody that's higher income, above 400% federal poverty level. So for a family of four, that's over $124,000 a year. We want to make sure that we're driving the costs of healthcare down, but as you said, the president has some ideas too that bypass a lot of the middlemen, get that money directly into the pockets of consumers. That gives them more flexibility and more freedom in being able to find a product that works for them. And then that money is more efficient because it goes directly to the consumer rather than through multiple middlemen, all who have to take a slice off to be able to pay for their overhead. So I think there's a lot of ideas out there. And as we've talked about, Republicans are committed to finding ways to make healthcare and health insurance, specifically in this case, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, making sure that that's affordable and available to folks who need it.
Let's look ahead. So this budget deal that just got signed into law, reopened to the government, it funds the government, the majority of it, through January 30th. When we get to that date, do you think we're going to have another government shutdown?
You know, I certainly hope that we don't have another government shutdown. We saw how damaging this government shutdown was. And again, it's incredibly disappointing to know that all 6 members of the Democrat delegation from Colorado voted against funding meals for 300,000 low-income kids, paychecks for air traffic control. We've gone through the list. So I certainly hope that we don't get to this point again at the end of January. The good news is, as part of this funding package, we were actually able to fund significant portions of the government for a year. The government is supposed to be funded through what are called 12 appropriations bills. They roughly correspond to the big departments in the government: Department of Defense, Department of Human Services, the Department of Agriculture. We actually passed 3 of those 12 bills as part of this deal. So things like SNAP, things like WIC, some of the other major departments within the government, they're actually funded for a year. That's the process that Republicans are trying to get back to, because that's more efficient with the taxpayer dollars, when we actually can go line by line and figure out where this money should be going, rather than a lot of the waste and abuse that tends to occur when you have these big omnibus packages that have kept the government funded for the last couple of decades.
So, okay, we talked about the budget. We know that's going to be something you guys are working on from now until that January 30th, the next deadline that's coming up. But what else is on the big to-do list right now that you guys are back at work?
Yeah, so one of the committees that I sit on is called the Energy and Commerce Committee. It has jurisdiction over about 70% of the U.S. economy. And we know that right now, American jobs and American cost of living is suffering from, among other things, Chinese pollution. We actually have this really perverse incentive where the more China pollutes, American jobs and American industry is actually held accountable for that. So we're trying to figure out a way through the Energy and Commerce Committee to make sure that we can reward American producers, we can bring jobs back to the United States, and not hold those jobs accountable for Chinese pollution through a lot of the air quality regulations that we currently have.
Okay, so my last question before we let you go, one of the items that will be coming up on the agenda, maybe as soon as next week, will be a vote on releasing files related to Jeffrey Epstein. Now, you did not sign on to the petition like Colorado Congressman Lauren Boebert did, but when it comes up in the House for a full vote, do you plan to vote in favor of releasing the files?
I've already voted in favor of releasing the files once before. House Resolution 668 was a bill that was on the floor earlier this year that I supported that said to release the Epstein files. So I don't see a situation where I vote against transparency.
All right. We always appreciate you coming on and sharing your Colorado point of view. We'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. After the break.